But next up on the 12:45 block, we have Robert Garber, partner at 7 Wires, and he's going to be interviewed by Sari Kaganoff, one of our favorites at HITLAB, and a big part of the Women's Health Tech Initiative out of HITLAB, and now really leading the consulting efforts and advisory work at Rock Health. So again, Robert and Sari, thank you for joining. Robert, how are you doing?
I'm great. Good to see you, Stan. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you too. Hopefully you're staying warm in Chicago. And while we wait for Sari to jump on, let's tee up some questions, because we've got hundreds of folks tuned in from around the world. Just an extraordinary turnout for this important meeting, given the energy around digital health right now. And one of the reasons why there is so much energy around digital health is because of this outfit known as 7 Wire in Chicago. And if you could tell us a little bit about what you guys learned last week at JPM.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I wish I had like some really insightful perspectives. It felt a lot of more of the same, that so far, even though the stock market has had some hiccups since the latter part of Q4, inflation and interest rates are going up. Still seems to be a lot of activity, a lot of excitement, a lot of froth, and a lot of money to get to work. So I haven't seen huge indications that we're in the pullback yet, but I suspect that will come. I wish I had the crystal ball that would tell me when, but I'll leave that for the other prognosticators.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was reading some of what one of your colleagues at 7 Wire was talking about, Lee Shapiro, relative to digital health funding, and what 7 Wire and what you guys are looking at for the levels of digital health funding in 2022 and where you're expecting those to go, and the fact that the Fed's looking at 2 or 3 different tranches of upturns and the interest rate side to kind of taper inflation a little bit. What are your views on that? Where are you seeing digital health funding going in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, I'll preface this by saying, in general, I'm a glass half empty investor. I lived through 2000, I lived through 2003 and 08, and I remember that things, as much as I wish, don't always go up and to the right. So I suspect that on the heels of some of the Fed activity and some of the market gyrations, we will probably see a bit of a pullback. I don't. I've given up trying to guess the when, but it does feel like we're in a bit of an unsustainable market cycle right now in terms of the size of the rounds, the velocity with which deals are getting done, the lack of discipline around which those deals are getting done, and lastly, sort of like a disconnect between value and market traction, right? So. So we'll continue to put money to work and be judicious and disciplined in our approach and try and pick our winners. We're never a high volume investor, and so I feel good about that in a market cycle like this. But so far there still seems to be a lot of activity, and last I saw maybe $1 trillion sitting on the sidelines. So that's a lot of money looking for a home.
Yeah, I'm dying to know where that sideline is. Robert, if you could just email me quietly after this program, I'd love to just know the location of the sideline. And if there's any secret code, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something, let me know the code as well. Or the PIN number, if the sideline has an ATM. But with that, our fearless leaders here, Sari, it's all yours. I'm handing the virtual podium over to you and Robert. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Good to see you, Sari.
Hey, good to see you as well. How are you doing in the freezing cold weather back in Chicago?
It is officially Siberia here in Chicago today. I woke up and it was a -8 wind chill, and so a far cry from when I was in Orlando yesterday. It was 75 degrees, but good to be with you this morning. Stan and I started a little bit of the dialogue while we were waiting for you to join us, but maybe start off with a little bit of background on the work you do. I think everybody's familiar with Rock Health, but clearly one best suited to talk a bit about what's going on in the marketplace and some predictions for 2022.
Yeah, sure, of course, happy to. So I'm the general manager of consulting at Rock Health, where I work with enterprise clients and late stage startups on digital health strategy and innovation. And the rest of Rock Health, of course, supporting startups and keeping tabs on all of the data going on in the industry, particularly funding, consumer adoption, and other kind of relevant metrics. So the funding topic you were just discussing is particularly relevant. So happy to chat about that as well.
Yeah, that's great. So maybe we'll dive right in. We don't have a lot of time. So is 2022 going to look different than 2021? And in what ways, how?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it will look different. Exactly how is still kind of up in the air, but let's start with funding. So in 2021, we saw almost twice the amount of funding that we saw in 2020, so 29.1 billion in funding to digital health startups in the US alone. But as you mentioned, there's $1 trillion waiting on the sidelines. So we expect to see a lot of that, some portion of that deploy in 2022. So we do think the funding will continue. Whether it'll double again or be the same as this year, kind of, I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball, but we definitely expect to see a lot of funding continue to deploy, especially as digital health moves more and more into the mainstream. And I think, a couple of trends we really expect to see in 2022 is continued SPAC deal making. I don't know if you and Stan had a chance to chat about that, but SPAC kind of being the relatively new vehicle on the block for public market exits. But there are a number of SPACs out there in the market looking for their target match. And so we expect to see a lot of those deals happening this year, and a lot of M&A as well, just within the digital health space. Mostly, as we've seen, a lot of it historically has been digital health companies acquiring other digital health companies, but also enterprise incumbent healthcare players or big tech as well. But a lot of it will be probably digital health companies acquiring others. And actually this year, we saw over 270 of those deals, M&A within digital health. And, historically is like about half of that. So we'll expect to see a lot of M&A continuing too.
And so, sorry, sticking with the consumer component of this, as perhaps people on the call don't know, our whole investment thesis is wrapped around consumer-driven health and what we call the informed connected health consumer, which is really how do we empower people with tools, technology, information so they can be better stewards of their care. So we've seen a lot of consumer gains over the last couple of years that people have been given information and tools and apps and services and virtual care in a way that they really never had for a while. But is this going to stay? And how is this going to evolve? Are we going to see a retrenching as reimbursement and regulatory changes may recoil a bit?
Yeah, so I think we will continue to see more consumers engaged in their health in terms of, in terms of what we've seen from the perspective of consumer adoption of digital health. It's continually on the uprise. In fact, our 2020 data showed 51% of consumers had tried telemedicine, and the majority of those were satisfied with their visit as compared to a regular visit. So we do see an increase from that perspective. But also, there's a lot of companies that are really trying out multiple business models at the same time. So creating a consumer-oriented product and then selling it direct to consumer, but also through employers or payers. And that enables them to test out the market, offer the product to consumers, but then create more of a scaled approach later. But what's nice about that is it also addresses all segments of the market, folks who have insurance, folks who don't, or through their employer or not. So we do expect to see more of those solutions continuing. At the same time, obviously, there are certain areas where there have been a huge proliferation, mental health being one of them, technologies and tools. And I imagine there will be some consolidation there, as already has been seen with Headspace Ginger and K-Health and Trust and a number of others, but it seems like there's just so much out there. We do need some consolidation. We also think we'll see some marketplaces emerging to help consumers and also other end users, whether they be providers or payers, navigate all of the options out there for them and help them understand what is better for them versus not, and also to help integrate on the back end.
Yeah, so maybe sticking with that last piece, how is this going to evolve in your mind? It's terrific that we now have all these solutions available to us as end users, probably in a way which really has never been the case in healthcare. But at the same time, it feels to me like it's created as much confusion, if not more than ever before. And health literacy continues to be sort of at an all-time low. And so, stick with mental health since you brought that up. there are thousands of mental health companies that have popped up in the last few years and lots of different apps. And so how do you see, other than consolidation, how do we think about, creating unified consumer experiences that help people get over this sort of information deficit that they have? It's great to hand them the stuff, but they don't even understand what it is or how to use it, or is this right for them? Providers are sort of behind the scenes, playing catch up from what we see in terms of how to use these tools. What are you seeing in the marketplace?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of angles to what you're saying. So in the first one is this idea of more comprehensive solutions, right? So in addition to M&A, there, from a perspective of one type to another, there are companies that are offering multiple solutions for the same patient. So instead of getting your mental health in one place, diabetes care in another, you can combine them and get them in the same place. But I think that from the health literacy perspective, there is a long way to go, but a lot of this is, some of it's incumbent on the companies themselves to explain the technology and the use both to the provider and to the patient. But I think some of this will also be kind of the job of the rest of us in the ecosystem to help create that shared language. I think a particularly important area to focus on is the clinical evidence and what does it mean when someone says that they can do X, because a lot of companies make claims but don't actually necessarily have the data. Like when you say you can do X, what does that really mean? Are we using the same terminology? Are we using the same standard to discuss that? Particularly for companies that don't require FDA approval, or is there a set of standards we can use? And there are a couple of, the DIME organization, the Digital Medicine Society, is definitely working on some standards more in relation to clinical playbooks and guidelines. But I think that having a sort of standard where we say, okay, if you're going to make a claim like X, you really need to mean that you can do it and have data to back it up, is the standard we're going to have to start to adopt as an industry. I think it would be great though if we started to teach in schools and people learned how to use these tools. They should probably also teach kids how to file their taxes as well. But that's something we probably should consider.
I know we just have a couple of minutes here, but any predictions on 2022 from the consumer perspective? Are we going to see continued influx of more tools? Are we going to see, because of some of the consolidation you mentioned, that people are going to understand that there are franchises or brands?
Yeah.
I think, are there underserved markets, sectors in the market where we should be looking for additional investment and new solutions for consumers? What are you seeing? What do you expect for this year?
Yeah, so I think probably three things I have in mind. The first one is addressing your last point, and this is really the market for folks who are more in the Medicaid space. So historically, a lot of the digital health solutions have really been for kind of commercially insured patients or direct to consumer at a relatively high price point. And, we think there's a big white space in solutions more addressed to the Medicaid population, which is, around 18% of the US. And so that's kind of a big area. And we do see that today there's lower adoption of digital health solutions in that space. I would also say that there have been a couple of companies starting, Waymark being one of them recently in that space, but there's definitely a lot of white space. In terms of other trends we'll see, I think two that I'm excited to see play out is, one of them is white labeling. There are a lot of companies that are offering services that you can actually just put the brand of another company in front of them. And I think we'll see a lot of companies starting to adopt that, where, whether it be a provider using the telehealth or digital health tools of another company, or whether it's a consumer company offering those. I think that will be one trend that we'll see. And then the other that I'm really excited about is a term we've coined, middle children. And the idea here is everyone has their eyes on Google and Microsoft and the big tech companies, but what about the medium-sized companies, the tech, retail, fitness companies, all the Nikes of the world and the Disney and all those companies that have they have a captive consumer audience, they have a great brand, and they really, I think, could be a great opportunity for them to enter the healthcare space. And so we've seen some of this already in the last couple of years, but I think we'll see more in 2022 and also beyond.
Great. Well, Sari, thank you so much for the insight. That's super helpful. And appreciate your time today. Great to be with you. And Stan, I will hand it back to you.
No, I appreciate that, Robert. And Sari, thank you both for joining us today.